realities that we still find in the world, but also the realities that we find here in Africa between Morocco and Sahrawi, and tell the story so that then as we speak about freedom of expression, the freedom of the media, diversity, unity, and most importantly, freedom just of being an individual in your own motherland, that must also apply to the women and children of Sahrawi. It must also apply to the women and children of Palestine. And we know precisely because of those who were behind the founding of the OAU that theirs was not a vision of a liberated and an emancipated Africa, but it was more of a united Africa without the colonial boundaries. And today when we write, when we position brands, when we communicate about what is good and what is not good, we need to also appreciate that our pockets of freedom must contribute towards an emancipated Africa. Because it is that the late Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, President Mandela, Amilcar Cabral, Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Toivo in Namibia, and many others encouraged us to build a type of society that must work tirelessly for a better Africa and a better world. Because in their character, they were internationalists. And what does it mean to be an internationalist? It means you don't see your identity limited to where you were born. And we know the story of Che Guevara, who ended up being a leader in the Cuban Revolution, and yet he was not necessarily of a Cuban origin. We know that there was no reason for the OAU to be formed, but precisely because it was a group of visionaries who understood that even their own countries will never be stable until South Africa is free, until the then Rhodesia is free, until Namibia is free, until the then Lorenzo Marx is free. I've even forgotten what was Namibia. Southwest African, something like that, yes. So they were selfless beyond their comfort. And what made them to be selfless beyond their comfort was consciousness. And therefore, one of the key things that must actually resonate in your discourse is the extent of consciousness amongst ourselves about the world we live in. Starting with the South Africa we live in. So that then, for everything that we do and you are involved in, you ensure that in its classical form, communication must then be defined as the imparting or exchanging of information through speech, through writing, through the use of some other modes, such as television, telephone, cyber and satellite platforms, but for a shared vision, for a common goal, and not just for a plethora of options that people have to identify. That in the discourse on communication, we need to also reflect on communication as essential in making sure that there's collaborative processes of reaching mutual understanding, where participants not only exchange information, but they also contribute towards the realization of a shared vision. And I think those who have been in the space of marketing, they know Coca-Cola doesn't invest on marketing and branding for nothing. It is because they've got a shared vision. Everyone from the security guard in any plant at Coca-Cola to the board of directors and the shareholders, that their shared vision is to make Coca-Cola to sell. Whether Minister Motsoaledi talks of sugar and how many spoons of sugar, they will make it to be something that is really tempting and attractive. That's because of a shared vision. It's the same with South African breweries. I mean, I don't drink beer. Don't ask me what do I drink. But when you see in a very, very hot day a glass of beer and you see the frost actually going down the glass, you actually feel like grabbing that and just gulping it. Precisely because they've invested on branding and marketing because of a shared vision. They've got an ultimate goal. An ultimate goal of leading us into temptation, increasing their sales, and making sure that they remain in the industry. So there is no communication that is just dry and innocent. Communication by its nature shapes a nation, shapes a society, defines a nation. And that is what must also be put in our discourse on communication on a better Africa and a better world, both in the private and in the public sector. So that then, even in the public sector or in the private sector, when some of us travel to other countries outside of Africa, you actually kill this question of saying, where did you buy these clothes? Did you buy your clothes at the airport? Is your home the same as our home? Because the assumption is that we live there up on the trees or in the mountains, and you don't dress like them. You only dress because you go into Europe. There are still those questions in 2018 about Africa. Who are you? Where did you? So you dress like this. These clothes, a suit. That time you are elegantly dressed. You're carrying a Louis Vuitton bag and stuff. They think you bought it at duty free. So it is that narrative that must make everybody to understand. But also the appreciation that we as Africans, especially when it comes to the space of communication, we must also be able to tell a story that we are a continent under construction. We are not yet a continent, even in South Africa, a nation that already exists. The reason why it is that important, it is important so that then all of us can become ambassadors. Because again, in the discourse on communication, you are either a weapon of mass destruction or you are a bearer of good news. You can't be in between. You can't be, especially for us in this continent where we know that today you have a Rwanda that is totally different from a Rwanda of yesterday. I just saw yesterday that Rwanda has been, Kigali has been declared the cleanest city in Africa. All because everyone in Rwanda, starting with the head of state, identified one core task that they will do to make Rwanda a clean country. And it became everybody's business. And they were able to explain it. And they were able to say, let's identify two things that would divide us as the Rwandese. One is that there's no more a Hutu or a Tutsi. A Hutu or a Tutsi, we are all Rwandese. Secondly, no story must be spoken about that has to do with the normalization of the conflict that Rwanda had. So there was, it was just a decision of the nation that anyone, you must never say, I'm of a Hutu origin. Like me today, I must be able to say, hey, I'm Nomvula Mokonyane, but originally I'm Kize from Embo, and then we descended to Mzimkulu, then we ended up in Hamaste. They don't relate with those things because they understand these are the things that caused conflict on their side. And even under the freedom of expression and the freedom of the media, these are things that are not allowed in Rwanda. Hence, they've been able to be where they are today. With all other challenges they have, their domestic challenges are not challenges for them to mock one another in the international platform. They've opted to have something that unites them. Keeping Rwanda clean. Simple. Doesn't need a big budget. It doesn't need research. You don't litter. If your street is messy, the president comes, he picks up the rubbish there. You'll be embarrassed that your rubbish in your street is being picked up by the president. That's it. So, I'm raising this because part of what we need to be dealing with is how best can we all work in ensuring that firstly we understand where we come from, so that then we know where we are, and of importance, agree as to where we're going. And the role of communication becomes so important, very important for the following reasons. That one, many of us have forgotten that as a nation, all we agreed on post-1994 was the right for every South African to vote for a party of your choice, and a new constitution, a flag, and a national anthem. We had to then go back and say, in pursuing what our constitution stands for, what vision do we have as South Africans? And hence, together, we worked on a shared vision called the National Development Plan. It's not a government plan. It's a shared vision of the people of South Africa. But beyond a shared vision 2030 of South Africa, we then also went to Africa and said, is there a shared vision for Africa? And that's when the OAU was then converted into the African Union, including the adoption of African Union Agenda 2063. So, as a country, we have Vision 2030. As Africa, we have Agenda 2063. In all of them, what has been identified as very key is an informed citizen, which brings me to you, to who you are and what you are about. An informed citizenry. An informed citizenry depends solely on the existence of a public relations and communication sector that can help realize our national interests and priorities and the goals of Africa. But precisely because we are still a nation under construction, we know that even this sector is up for grabs, for manipulation, for misuse, and most importantly, for delaying the realization of Vision 2030 and 2063. I was saying earlier on, if today you have somebody in a panel who is at least 40, 41, 36, and says the situation in South Africa is far from being better, you then say, what is your baseline? What do you compare it with? Because prior to you being born, there was never such a thing like you sitting in a studio and saying all that you are saying. Just that freedom. Just that. Forget any, just that freedom of you walking into a studio and speaking your view and being an analyst, a commentator, a journalist, penning an opinion. It is a freedom that was never there. This was institutionalized through Stratcom, which was linked directly to government institutions of propaganda, of the destruction of Africa, and hence they could raid Lesotho, they could raid Mozambique, and they could justify what they are doing. Because for them, communication was a weapon to conscientize the world about what is wrong as being a right thing to do, because they were hunting terrorists. So, in this very period where we celebrating the life of President Nelson Mandela, I asked Pumla, the acting head of GCIS, to say, Pumla, just check for me, and she's promised that she will give me the information on Friday, and today is Friday. So, how many times in our media just prior to 1994 have we had anyone in Parliament talking about how good Nelson Mandela, how selfless was Nelson Mandela? And she was saying, hey, Minister, I'm sure you know it will only be Helen Suzman. And I said, but no, I just want us to remember, because suddenly we all forget. And then we all are made to assume that we've been good to one another. And yet we've been so horrible against one another. And then I said to her, go also and check for me on print how many good articles before the release of Nelson Mandela were actually written about him on his birthday. Now that the whole world is celebrating the icon, on July, all of us will be doing our, 67 minutes? Yes. I said to her, go and check for me. Because if we're not going to have an informed citizenry, everybody will just say, they loved him, but the problem is he was not ready to cooperate with them. That's why he ended up in prison. We must know that we come from an era where we were enemies. Enemies, particularly the system being the enemy of the people. Not blacks and whites, but a system that was created to be the enemy of our people and was able to influence the white community to detest the black community and the black community to feel inferior. Where is that story? So that then this vision 2030 helps my grandson to understand why we are still so excited about Africa Day, about April 27, but even my neighbor, the Van Niekerks in Noord-Durban, so that her grandson must appreciate why we celebrate Freedom Day. Because otherwise, even the mother, the wife of Mr. Van Niekerk, my neighbor, never knew Kagiso, which is actually 8 kilometers from where I stay. She never knew that there existed that space. But she knew that there was a Tani who always came to clean her home, look after them. But as to where this person lived, it never existed. It is that discourse in the communication and public relations that we must deal with, because casualties of where we come from are not the young ones. It's us over 35 and above who can actually infest negativity on the young and innocent who don't know this thing. Therefore, your issues around the realization of national and continental as well as global interests become very important if you are conscientized and appreciate that this is not a period of opportunities, but you also are finding yourself in a period of being a responsible citizen in the space where you are. Not to be protective of the wrongdoings, but being able to flash the story about Steinhoff, as we have spoken about Jacob Zuma, to make a big story, so that then everyone can see fairness, objectivity, but also make sure that the public space moves away from being the one that determines what's going to happen tomorrow, and actually instill fear and uncertainty. Because if we do that, we do not actually help in building a better Africa and a better world. The good thing is that part of what we should all be appreciating is the extent to which there's been a support of changing the way things are done or used to be done, and doing things the way that they were never done in this country, amongst others through the introduction, the very constitution, the introduction of various pieces of legislation, and the demand for transformation. And the communication sector is one that is yet to be transformed. It is one that is yet to be transformed, looking at the issues of gender, looking at the issues of race, looking at the issues of disability. And therefore, no sector of society or of business or opportunities has to be absolved from what a nation seeks to do. And my experience is that of Rwanda. That even in our own country, we must create opportunities, and it is only government that can create an enabling environment for others to participate and be part of the discourse. The advertising sector. Yesterday I had a meeting with somebody, I'm sure you can Google. Her name is Christine Kunta. Very radical woman. She lives here. I love her to bits because I wish I can be like her when I'm her age. I wish. So you now know some of the people who make me to be a bit crazy. Those are the people. And I walked into her house. She had a chat in the kitchen. And part of the workshop last night was about the advertising sector. I left there feeling so miserable. And she said, you see, look at it. Look at it. Show me a Kumalo and Mkize advertising agency that has got a contract with government. Show me new entrants of disabled people. But of importance, look at how your own regulatory capacity is immediately just kicking out any new entrant, your ICASA and so on, the regulatory environment and stuff. And of importance, what she also said was, the problem is we all assume there is no possibility. And it is all because people believe that the measures of quality when it comes to PR, to marketing, branding, they are already set. And therefore, when you come in, you must be at that level. And she said, it can't be. And she had a graph on the next chart, and she said, this is how all of them have evolved. And if you are not going to go in and say, in the same way as it has happened in construction, in manufacturing, the story of black industrialists, the story of people, women in construction and stuff, even in this space, work must be done. But of importance, you must find those who are prepared to go into the space and fight and contest, but be ready to be unpopular and be on the headlines for wrong things. That was my dinner last night. And I think for me, of importance is exactly that. When opportunities are created, how many of us are prepared to come in? Secondly, the standards that we put, say GCIS. What would it help when GCIS will put an advert and we know that there will be this big brother, normally they are brothers, this big brother who you will compete with, who has the financial muscle, who has the experience, and GCIS would say, we can't have you because this one is coming to us at a cheaper price, better capacity, turnaround time. How are you going to match them if government doesn't create an enabling environment? So, it is those things that we must talk about. But as we talk about them, there must also be preparedness to be responsible when an opportunity is created. I've been an MEC for housing, and one of the things I said when I brought in our women in construction was, if you have come to this position and you are being assisted on how to be a developer, for the coming 3 years, you're not going to change your hairstyle, your car, where you live, and all those things. Every cent you get, you plow it back to your business. And we know what's happening with community media. Part of what we're dealing with, where there's a lot of fronting, where there is incapacity in terms of good governance, but where there is also abuse and maladministration on the entities that are supposed to support those that are coming from community media. So the same even with the other issues of public relations, marketing, branding, and so forth. How do we make sure that when we support the startup, I don't like that word, the startup and the new entrants, it must also not be something that is not polished or that seek to get polished, so that then we grow the sector, we transform the sector, but of importance, we create originals and even embrace indigenous knowledge, and most importantly, opening up for women, young people, and people living with disability. The last thing that I want to also talk about, it's about what is perceived to be the responsibility of government. Create an opportunity. And when you create an opportunity, the only thing that you must do is to pump money. And I do want to suggest that this is one space that has really corrupted the communication sector, because where resources are not brought in formally, people get grabbed by those who have the money. Then they determine the brand, they determine the headline, they determine the frequency, they determine your targeted audience, and it then destroys the credibility of the work you are doing, because there's resistance to declaration or even transparency in that space. I can say it here and I can repeat it. We know what has been happening with the illicit tobacco industry and advertising. We now know with SASSA what is happening when government want to take over the SASSA card, and what CPS is doing now, ambush marketing. And we know with many others that have done the same. I grew up in an organization called COSAS, and because I came from a very poor family, when COSAS said we must discourage women from doing their PEM and stuff because they're taking money from their parents, it was a good campaign for me because I couldn't afford a PEM. So, but I can tell you how many people came to COSAS leadership and promised us a free hairdo, because they know you are popular, they know that you are influential in your school, they know that you will actually go out. And when there was the black like me, I agree we were black power with polo necks and stuff, and say, no, we can make it look kaya, come. But the beauty of it, which I really am grateful of, was we were not just anti-something without consciousness, without understanding why we were doing that. Because three things were very important for us. Very young. When we get to school, you must not feel like an outcast because your parents can't buy you the best shoes. So black and white for all of us. Secondly, you must not feel bad because your parents were able to take you to the Black Like Me saloon and all those things, or that stretching thing. We must all look alike. The only thing you can do is to just plait your hair, you know, the Ben and Betty, I'm sure you know, the ones that you do. Yeah, that was the one. And what it really did, it made all of us to look alike, and there was solidarity. That on its own was, besides the politics behind that organization, helped because we had a shared vision, particularly for the girl child, who will feel and being an outcast if I can't afford to do my hair. And all of us in the classroom, if we can't afford to have the most expensive pair of shoes and the uniform and stuff, black and white, everybody. And that united us. So what I'm really trying to raise is that we can't be talking about opportunities when we don't start with responsibility. Because firstly, the issue of identity becomes important. Secondly, the issue of belonging becomes important. Thirdly, the issue of a shared vision. Let's fight, but understanding that we're fighting over the realization of a shared vision. Where we are today, I'm as yet to find a shared vision between many of us in the media, in the communication space, and the nation on this National Development Plan, including on this Agenda 2063. I've not seen the story about Rwanda in any newspaper. I've not seen the story about Rwanda and it being acknowledged by African leaders. I've not seen it on SABC in 404. I have not seen it. But you'll see all these miseries of the DRC. Yes, it's important to write about them, but you must inspire hope. Inspire hope, even of the visit by one head of state from Africa to Zimbabwe, spending a day yesterday with the current leader of Zimbabwe, and today going to visit former President Robert Mugabe. It can be a negativity, but it must show Africans that we are no permanent enemies. And the Ubuntu nje bethu bokuthi umuntu akalahlwa. And it's that I think, fine, let's talk about opportunities, let's talk about what is in it, especially those that are in the private sector. But no one is private in a society that is under construction. And what we carry is our NDP. And our NDP, yes, talks about economic development, inclusive growth, but in every byline of that economic development and inclusive growth, it must be nation building and social cohesion. Thank you very much.